Welcome. So I want to provide a brief overview of Git technology, specifically how you can configure it on your computer. This will not go into all the functionality of Git, but rather just getting your computer set up to use it. I'll also be using GitHub. Sometimes people will say GitHub meaning Git. They are definitely related, but the two are very different things. Git technology and GitHub. Git was actually developed by the same person, Linus Torvalds, that created the Linux kernel. So a very skilled software engineer for sure. I think before that there was something called BitKeeper that had some functionality. For those of you guys a little bit older, and this I encountered some of this in my very early development years. Something called Mercurial. There's a few other things around out there, but Git has pretty much ate everybody else's lunch, basically. It's kind of the premier way of source code management. So sometimes you'll hear people talk about engineering SCM. Source code management is very important. It's kind of how you control source code to make sure that whenever you have multiple collaborators, you have a way of merging new features in without just disrupting the whole thing. If you're working on classroom assignments or whatever else, I very much encourage you to learn Git because it can make your life very simple. Especially if you like start working on something and you put something in a bad state and you would just like to go back to the point where you knew it was working. Git makes that very easy to do. So Git is one of the most powerful tools that you can understand as a software engineer for sure. And not just software. I mean, people of all walks of life use this. I know actuaries working for insurance companies use it. I know people that develop software, they almost always use it. People developing hardware, they use it. Just about anything that you are creating that you need to maintain and have multiple collaborators on, or you may need to roll back or whatever else, they will use Git. Now, with Git, every time that you're kind of working on a project, you'll typically create what's called a repository. GitHub is just basically a service that makes repositories available remotely, so you don't have to configure them on your own server. You can certainly have your own kind of server representing your repository, but GitHub kind of makes that easy. Also, GitHub has incorporated things called workflows. I don't believe that that's present in some of the other repository providers like GitLab. I don't think workflows are as widely, if they are there, I don't think they're as mature as what GitHub has. GitHub has found ways of incorporating it so that way when you make pushes to it, it kind of kicks off certain tasks that you can incorporate with AWS or do certain things. Anyway, that's a bit out of scope, but essentially this lecture is going to be showing you how you can configure Git on your computer and how you can link it to GitHub to be your kind of remote repository server effectively, or service. So let's go ahead and get started. What I would like to do is I'd like to transfer my screen over to maybe first an internet browser, and let's go to GitHub to start off with. Okay, so here's my browser. I've already got one tab open that has GitHub. What I recommend that you do is that you go ahead, if you've already created an account, all you're going to do is just go ahead and sign in. Otherwise, you need to sign up. Now, this is what I recommend. When you're using your email, so to be honest, I teach at a university, and so I'm pretty much making this video available to show my students how to get configured for the early classes or whatever. I recommend that you don't necessarily use your school email unless you have an instructor that's telling you to or you have some reason to. I recommend that you set up GitHub with the email that you plan on using the rest of your life as a professional. The reason is, and you can always change your email too, but once you create an account, you're going to have kind of a profile on GitHub that's almost going to kind of be like something that you could add to a resume. As you become more active on GitHub, there's kind of like a heat map that you'll be able to see. And when you're looking at it, you'll be able to show off and say, hey, I am very active on GitHub. It may demonstrate that you're very mature in your software engineering development if you show that you are daily making several commits to your repositories. You make some repositories publicly available so that way employers can look at them and kind of you get to show off how mature you're able to write code. You can demonstrate that you're a polyglot. You can write Python, C++, Java, whatever other language that you might be, Rust, whatever language that you might learn. So anyway, I recommend that you use an email. And if you're one of my students, use an email that you plan on using the rest of your life or in your professional career. You can always change it. You don't have to lock your username to an email, but that's just what I recommend. When you leave a school or when you leave a job, sometimes you lose access to that email. So I would just use the email that you plan on using. Okay, that's just a piece of advice. So I already have my account created, and I want to show you briefly about this heat map, just briefly. So I'm going to log in, and it does use two-factor authentication. So I guess I will send, maybe use my Git mobile thing. I guess it's okay to show you guys this because by the time you watch this video, this would have already expired, I suppose. Let me go ahead and get this done. Give it a moment, I suppose. There we go. Now, this is what I'm talking about. So, whenever you look at your profile, you see that you'll have kind of a heat map down here. And this past year actually was quite a bit slower than what I had intended. As you can see, I do web development work, I do Python stuff, C stuff, and if you were to look at all of my repositories, some of your repositories will maybe inside of an organization, some of mine are. So this is just kind of like my personal repositories here. If I was to go into my other organizations, I don't really want to pull it up because some of those are kind of associated with proprietary people. This is the heat map that I'm showing. So 2,505 contributions is not much. Depending on where you work or who you work with, some places don't want you just to keep committing over and over. They want you to get to a good stable point, then you commit whatever. Most of the time they leave it to you, or you'll kind of merge in with the culture of the organization. But this basically just shows how active you are. So you can see maybe as me as a teacher now, that's primarily what I do. You will see that December is a bit of a slow month, right? Because you can see after a certain point, I just kind of like fall off the world here, and then I chime back in the early part of January. So if you look through, you'll be able to see that over the years, you'll have many things. So some of this is where I was actually active in private industry. And if I was to scroll down, you would see that this probably goes all the way down to like 2010 or whatever. And it'd be pretty much green. So you can see like on here, April the 28th, or April the 11th, I had 28 contributions. These kind of bright greens means that you had a lot. Nothing means you didn't do anything. So you can see like here on the Saturdays and the Sundays, nothing was happening. And pretty active year. Not necessarily this is a lot, but you guys see it. What I recommend is use GitHub and make it almost like a social media kind of profile for you. So and you can decide whether or not you want to make this heat map available. If you're a student, employers are going to know that you are a new person, that you may not have a lot of things under your belt, but it's never too early to start with your GitHub profile, where you're going to start making repositories that's going to show off the code that you can write, that you can demonstrate to employers to show your maturity, to show that you know all the nifty little C pointers and that you know how to allocate and deallocate memory appropriately, or maybe you write your own custom memory allocator. Is what I've got here. I don't know. You could demonstrate that you know how to use Python beyond just kind of a sequential code and a little bit clumsy code. You actually know how to structure it using object-oriented techniques, whatever. So basically, that's just my opinion. Start getting on GitHub. Whenever you have a class and you have an assignment and you have programming, start creating repositories for your classes. Start creating repositories and organize your code and make the projects that you do in class kind of available on your GitHub, assuming that your teacher doesn't tell you not to make them public. Start developing your profile and make those repositories public and really start to refine them and make daily contributions to it. Get this heat map to the point to where you can say, employers, I know Git technology, and this Git technology and this heat map really shows that I'm mature and that I am a serious software developer, I am a serious software engineer, whatever, and that I make common contributions, and coding is like a everyday part of my life. That's what, to me, whenever I was working in industry and I was a project manager that would actually hire people on, whatever, it was actually good to see people that would actually make their GitHub profile available and you could see their heat map, because in my opinion, and it just seemed to be true again and again, the people that seem to be active on GitHub tend to have a little bit more software development maturity under their belt. And so GitHub can actually, or Git technology can actually be quite, I wouldn't say complicated, but it can be a little bit cumbersome if you're not familiar how to use it, because if you start getting things in a bad state and you have to start reconciling, You'll eventually learn this when you go to get your job, but if you're already familiar with how to do that, it'll be a big help. It'll also make you more conversational when you're getting that first job. So anyway, now that I have spent at least 5 minutes on something that's not terribly relevant, I want to show you guys how we can actually get technology set up on your computer. Remember, this is GitHub. Git Technology is actually software that's on your computer. Two different things. You don't have to use GitHub. You can actually configure any server, including the one in your home, to be a Git repository server. There's really not much reason to do that, given that we got services like GitHub. There are places that have such proprietary information. I am aware of some contractual agreements where they say you have to host these locally, but a lot of organizations are so comfortable with GitHub that they actually use GitHub and they feel very safe about it. So, whatever your contracting employer wants, I recommend it. I would say there's about a 95% chance that your common employers, and including most of the big ones, will be on GitHub. I'm nearly positive of that. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is I want to tell you folks that are on Windows to do something. This is only for the Windows people. If you are working on Linux or if you're working on Apple, disregard what I'm about to do. I recommend that you guys do this if you're on a Windows machine. Type in git bash, right? Do git bash, and then you'll see this git-scm. Remember what SCM stands for? SCM stands for Source Code Management. Let me tell you what this does. Whenever you download this, now I will be honest and say that I do acknowledge that there is a download for Mac OS, there is a download for Linux. There is no reason that you should download this if you're already on a Mac or a Linux, because your terminal is going to be nearly identical and it's all set up and ready to go, pretty much turnkey ready to use Git technology. There's no reason to download this. However, if you're on Windows, I 100% recommend it that you download Git Bash. So if you're on Windows and if you're in my class, I'm going to tell you, if you start coming to the office and you start saying, hey, these commands that you are typing in and you're showing me, they don't seem to work. They don't seem to be like responding on my computer the way that you think that they are. I'm going to tell you, the first question that I will ask, do you have Git Bash? And if you look at me with some sort of bewildered look, I'm going to say, go download Git Bash and then try to do what I demonstrated to you and see if it doesn't work best. This is one of the first common questions I get by new students. The commands you're showing me don't seem to work. And I'll say, well, make sure you're using Git Bash. They'll say, what's that? I say, let's go watch this video on how to do the initial configuration. So you click Windows and then you install it. And so from then on, anytime that you see me doing terminal work, well, that little black screen where you're typing in commands and hitting enter, whenever you see me going to the terminal, that needs to be you opening Git Bash. Okay, so most of the time I'll try to say, for you Windows folks, make sure that you open up Git Bash. For those of you guys on Mac and Linux, just use the terminal. All right. Now what Git Bash actually does is it allows you to kind of have Linux-like commands available on your machine. It just makes things quite easier, so where you don't have to kind of fight with the PowerShell. And when you look up help online, there'll be commands that they'll be like kind of presenting in a way that's kind of for the Mac and Linux people, and then the Windows people sometimes have to do something different, but Git Bash kind of solves that. It just makes it available for you so you don't have to go through the headaches of everything else. You just open up Git Bash and then you can use the terminal just like everybody else is using. Okay? And to be honest, I know that Windows is probably the premier operating system, but some of this software development engineering, it really kind of hovers around the Mac and the Linux kind of environments. So if you're going to be a serious software developer, you need to learn how to do the commands based on Linux. And then if you really want to become very comfortable, know how to do the ones on Windows, PowerShell, for example. But for the most standard things of server commands, you're pretty much going to be using the Mac, Linux, which they're almost 99% overlap between them. I'd say at least 90% overlap between Mac and Linux commands. If there's any difference, it's typically just by a little bit of a syntax. Windows folks are sometimes off into their own world a bit on that, and as a new software developer it can be a little bit confusing. So go ahead and download Git Bash. It will allow you to use a terminal similar to Linux and Mac. Okay, another long story, another long-winded description for something that I'm just trying to emphasize how serious it is. So download Windows, Git Bash, install that. Okay, all right. So at this point, if you're everyone, you should have created an account on GitHub. It's free. If you are a student, you can get actually the Premier version for free while you're a student. Now, what happens is you can have unlimited public repositories, I think, with GitHub. You do have some space restrictions, but unless you're creating a very massive code code project, you probably won't hit that limit, probably. And then even if you do need to upgrade, I think it's only like $7 a month if you really want the Premier one. But if you're a student or you're an educator, don't buy that because you get that for free, I believe, if you just submit it. Now, you will probably have to maybe take a picture of ID, or you'll have to give proof of your email, or you'll have to do something showing you're a student. You may have to take a picture of your registration, whatever. You may have to do that once a semester, once a year, who knows. So you either pay $7 or you get it for free. I recommend throughout your professional career, maintain the premier version of GitHub. Go ahead and get that kind of upgrade, that $7 something dollars. This is a little bit dated information. It's been $7 to $9 for a long time, I think. But anyway, you guys get the idea. So in any case, if you're in my class or you're just doing things for class, typically the free version would work fine. That'll be just fine. But go ahead, if you have the ability to get the Premier one, get the Premier one because it's free to students, whatever. Okay. Now, so you got your account created, and if you're on Windows, I'm going to assume that you now have Git Bash installed. So pause this video, download Git Bash, install it. It's very quick. Get all that set up, open it up, make sure that you understand that it's there, and you should be good to go. So at this point, I'm going to assume that everybody has their GitHub account created. I'm going to assume that the Windows only folks have Git Bash downloaded and that all of us are ready to move forward. All right. So now we have Git Technology installed. Typically when you install Git Bash, it makes the Git Technology available to your computer. That's another one of the benefits. It actually installs everything that you need to have Git Technology on your computer. For those of you guys that was using Mac, it was probably already installed on your computer, ready to go from the day you bought your computer, if it's a relatively new Apple computer. If you're on Linux, the Git Technology, unless you installed a very minimal version, like a minimal server instance, you typically have it. So it's usually for Linux and Mac people. For you Windows folks, installing Git Bash, that's all you need to do. For you Linux and Mac people, if there's a chance that you don't have Git, what you want to do is you just type in Git, open up a terminal, type in Git. If you see something like that, then that basically means, actually I think if you do Git-V, it'll tell you the version. I'm using version 2.39, which is a fairly recent one. It may be the latest one, I don't know. If you see Git, if you do Git-V, and it spits all this out, you should be good. If it doesn't, it's typically just a quick Google command. For you Apple folks, it'll be like brew install something. For you Ubuntu people, it'd be like apt-get install git, whatever. Ubuntu already has it in there unless you install like a very minimal version. Red Hat people, it'll be yum install git, I think, whatever. For the vast majority of us, we will not have to install Git. Windows folks, you get it when you install Git Bash. Linux and Mac people, it's probably already on there. So now at this point, I'm going to assume, by the way, when you see me opening this terminal screen, whenever you see this kind of black and white thing where I'm issuing commands, looks like this. Whenever I open this up, you Windows folks, you should open up Git Bash. This screen, this terminal, that should not be PowerShell or command prompt for you Windows people. It should be Git Bash. When you open up Git Bash, it'll look like this or something similar. This part over here may say something different, but it's probably not far off. Linux people, what you want to do is find terminal and open up terminal. Mac people, it's also called terminal. That's what everybody should be going to at this point. Okay, so now we're all set, right? What we're going to have to do is whenever we go to a Git repository, let's suppose that I want to go to a repository, my teacher says, hey, I want to make one available. I click this repositories, I could bring one in. I'll show you guys how to do that here in a second. You can always bring a repository into your computer without having any kind of, I don't know, any kind of authentication, as long as it's public. Now the problem is that sometimes you need to be able to write to your repository. The GitHub repository needs to make sure that the appropriate people with authentication is able to write and push things to these repositories. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pause the video here just for a second, and I'm actually going to create a new repository just so we can see what's happening. Give me one moment. I'll let you guys actually see me create this. I had to pause it because actually I've got some repositories that I don't want just kind of flashed all over the internet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say maybe Nathan J. Russell, my repository is going to be fake demo. Let's see if that's available. Okay, so it says fake demos, okay, and I'm going to put a description here. This was created to demonstrate Git technology. Okay. And I'm going to make this public, right? We'll just go ahead and make it public. I'm going to always click add a README. Every repository should have a README. Basically, what this is going to do is just going to create a file with just some basic information. Git ignore files are basically sometimes, like when you create a virtual Python environment or you compile code, there's certain files that you don't want to push up. Maybe they are credentials to a database that's unique to you and not everybody else on the team. Basically, you don't want that to be sent up. So what you could do is you could add certain directories, certain files to the git ignore file, and anytime you push something to GitHub, by the way, there's an excellent chance that some of you guys don't understand all that I'm saying. That's not really all that important at the moment. Just hear what I'm saying, and we'll get to that in other videos, how to use Git and what some of these things mean. But just for right now, this video is dedicated to getting you connected between your repository and your local Git software on your computer. It's associating your computer with the GitHub repository so that way you are authenticated to make changes to that repository that's on the remote side. So basically this git ignore, if you don't understand what I'm saying, that's fine. It's basically if you don't want some files to be shared on this remote repository, you'll just add them to the git ignore, and then Git will not add those. Choose a license. For those of you guys that are not familiar, it's open source software. Basically means anybody can use it as long as they give you credit. There's things called the Creative Commons, Apache license. You got MIT. These are basically legal documents that you should understand. Typically, you're fine with just clicking none. If you work for a company, you certainly don't want to open source things that you create for them. You probably won't make this public anyway. It'll be private. All right. So what I'm going to say create repository. Okay, and then it basically takes me to the screen. And this is my fake repository. Basically, when you look at the README file, it's really a markdown file. And whenever somebody goes to your repository, whatever's in that README file will be displayed down here, right? And you could edit it, whatever else. So the idea is that we actually want to bring things from the remote repository into our computer so that way we can make changes, then push it back up. So the first thing we want to do is we want to click this, and then, do you see this? What we want to do is not click this one, not click this one. This is kind of something that used to be okay. You can still get repositories. You can still bring it into your local computer using this, but you won't be able to write to it because this is no longer. Git used to be able to ask you for a username and password, and then you could use this to push and pull things back and forth, but that's no longer allowed. You basically have to use SSH. Now this GitHub command line interface, I'm not super familiar with it, but I am familiar with it, but this is kind of a different scope. Everybody just select this one. What you're going to do is you're going to go over here and you're going to click this copy, and then you're going to do git clone, and then you're going to paste, and then when you do that, basically you'll actually let me do this. Let me just clear that off. Forget what I just did. I'm going to make a new directory. This is what I recommend all students to do. If you are in one of my classes or you're in any class, let's suppose that you are in my CSE 310 class, so or 220 class. We'll say make directory, and then I'm going to call it CSE 220. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into that directory. So if I do this, so basically, if you were to look at your file browser, when you issued this command mkdir, it essentially made a new folder effectively. So anytime you see the tilde, that means that's your home directory. That's kind of like where everything starts from in your home directory. This mkdir means make directory, and it essentially makes a folder if you're okay with saying that, CSC 220. Now what I'm going to do is I want to go into that folder or that directory. Probably should get in the habit of calling it a directory, I'd say. So we're going to do cd, which means change directory, and we're going to do csc underscore 220. I'm now in that folder. What I can do is I could do the command ls, which means list or list structure, whatever, and you hit enter. Notice that nothing happened other than that. That means that folder is completely empty. It's completely empty. So it's nothing to show. So when I say list the structure, nothing's in there. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do git clone, and I'm going to paste that thing that I just copied from the other screen. Notice how it said that. Now when I do the command ls, notice that I now have a directory called fake demo. Whatever the name of this repository was will be the directory name over here. Now watch what happens when I do cd into the fake demo. Now when I do ls, notice that this thing right here is letting me know which directory I'm in. Notice that there's only one file in here called readme.md. That is the only file that is inside there, right? That's the only file. So basically what I did was, there's this remote repository in GitHub. I now have made everything on that remote repository into my personal computer, right? Everything inside there is now into my personal computer. Okay. Now, let's suppose that I make a change. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause this video just for a second, and I'm going to show you how to open up your GitHub repository in VS Code. If you're in my Java class, we'll do the same thing with IntelliJ, but for right now, this is just the configuration. You don't actually have to do this. This is just kind of demonstrating what's going to happen. So let me pause this just for a moment, and I'm going to show you how to bring this into GitHub and VS Code. Okay, so you're going to see just a little bit of a different screen now. You're going to see that I've got this. I'm going to go over here and I'm going to click this open, and I'm going to show you how to basically do this. So I'm going to say click file. I'm going to go down here. It says add folder to workspace. And then basically right here's my fake demo. Don't click inside here, click the folder and then click add. And then you're going to say, yep, I trust every one of these guys. Good. We'll do this later. Okay, so now if you click your file browser, you'll see that we got this README file. Now it says this was created to demonstrate Git technology. Notice that it's a markdown, so everything with this hashtag essentially becomes a header, so that's good. The problem is that right now we absolutely do not have a way to make changes and then push it from the computer up here to the remote repository. Okay, so this is what the purpose of this video actually is. We need to have a way of authenticating our computer with this GitHub repository, so that way this machine, this repository knows that anything I push to it, that my name is Nathan J. Russell, this is my user, and that this can be trusted whatever I'm trying to push up. So how does that work? Well, it turns out that it uses a kind of a cryptography type tool called SSH keys, right? Now, before we can actually upload a key, we have to create one. So just when you thought this was going to be a simple video, we had to keep going over and over and over things, and that's okay, because there's a reason why they pay software engineers, computer engineers pretty good money, is because things aren't easy, right? You actually have to learn a few things to make things work. So you're going to click the Google, you're going to go to Google. Let's go to Google, and here's what I want everybody to type. Type in create SSH key GitHub. Do that, okay? Create SSH key GitHub. Then hit enter. Notice I've already clicked it because I was practicing this video before I actually kind of made the video. Click this. Click this first link. It should say generating a new SSH key and adding it to the SSH agent. This is going to be so nice because it's going to walk you through how to do it, no matter if you're on a Windows machine or you're on an Apple or you're on a Linux machine, whatever. So click this. Now here's what I want everybody to be aware of. This thing, usually when you visit a web page, your browser sends all sorts of metadata to a server, letting it know what the operating system is. There's an excellent chance that when you go there, you have three options. You're either going to be on an Apple computer, you're going to be on a Windows computer, or you're going to be on a Linux computer. What's nice is it typically picks the correct one for you, but make sure that it's actually picked the correct one for you. Sometimes when you do like private browsing or whatever, these things can obfuscate what you're actually using or try to mask it. Sometimes it'll lie, whatever. Just make sure that this is highlighted. So I am actually on an Apple computer, so Mac is selected. If you are on Windows, you'll need to do that. If you're on Linux, you need to do that. Now, what I want you guys to do, I'm going to see if I can see this. Whenever you click between Mac and Windows or whatever else, you're going to find that the vast majority of these things don't change. Partly because you downloaded Git Bash, which makes the kind of the standard Linux commands available on your Windows machine, and so there's not a reason to have a whole lot of things. That was one of the biggest benefits of Git Bash, is it really made things much easier for the Windows folks. So I'm on an Apple. Whatever you're using, you'll click that. So I'm going to go through the Apple thing. As you'll notice, it's going to give you step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. Well, actually go here. So basically this first 3 steps is basically you creating an SSH key. All right, so it says here, open up a terminal. Now, what does that mean if you're on Windows? Let's see what it says for the Windows folks. Let's make sure, just so we're not, because most of you are going to be Windows probably. Open Git Bash. Remember what I said? Open Git Bash. So it's good. It says that. So I'm going to go back to Mac. Everybody's going to follow these instructions just like they would. What you're going to do is you're going to basically highlight this. There may be a copy. Nope. Highlight this and then copy it. Then go over to your browser. Sorry, not your browser, your terminal. By the way, if you type clear, it kind of resets that, and then you could paste it. What this means is, I'll walk you through these commands. It means generate a key. What this says is generate a key, an SSH key. Make it type ED25519. Now, if you guys look that up, I don't want to have a cryptography course here for you. There's 2 primary versions. There is an excellent chance that you may see something called RSA there, or elliptic curve. So there's 2 different versions. You could do an elliptic curve, which is what this is actually trying to describe, or you can use an RSA version. Just copy and paste the one that's there. And what does this mean? -C is basically a string where what you want to do is, instead of this, you actually want to type in your email address. So maybe mine is nathan.russell at whatever email, right? So you want to put fake.com. Don't put fake. Actually put your actual username that you're going to, your actual email address that you're going to be using. I don't know how much this actually matters. Don't want to go into a cryptography course here. But basically, between the 2 double quotes where it had like that fake email, put your actual email. Then whenever you hit enter, I'll put Gmail. This is not my email address, by the way. We'll put it in there. Then when you hit enter, it says generating public, private, this type of elliptic curve key pair. Key pair means that there's a private key, there's a public key. It's actually generating 2 different keys. A public key is what you can share with the world. The private key is what you need to keep private. You don't even have to know any of that. What I want you guys to look is, it's going to give you kind of a default path. What I recommend is that you actually keep this there. Okay, I would recommend that you keep this just like it is. Now, here's something that I want you to do, maybe just to make sure. If you get an error when you do this, hit Control-C and cancel it. Actually, I tell you what, before we do anything, maybe here's what you should do. Do CD and then do tilde. What that does is that takes you to your home directory. What you should probably do first, even before you do the elliptic curve, even before you do the SSH keygen, maybe you do this. Do mkdir and then do .ssh. Make that directory. Now, the reason I'm not going, you'll hit enter there. The reason that I'm not doing is because I already have it there and I don't want to cause any problems, so I'm not going to hit enter because I already have a .ssh on my computer. So before you start generating anything on on that Git Bash from that web page, I recommend you do this. Go to cd tilde, which takes you to your home directory, and then do mkdir.ssh. Dot files are typically hidden. That means that they are present, but they don't show up unless you explicitly are wanting to find them. Okay? That doesn't mean they're secure, it just means it takes it out of the view of what you typically look at. Alright, so after you hit enter, you're now going to go back and you're going to do this. So you're going to go to ssh-keygen-this, then you're going to enter the file. What this basically means is that you're actually going to be creating this. Now, I'm actually not going to do that because I've actually already got something at that file address. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do users, and I'm going to do Nathan Russell. This is actually file paths. And I'm going to do .ssh, and I'm going to rename this as something else, not ID underscore ed25519. I'm actually going to say pretend. Okay, I'm just going to call it pretend. And I'm going to hit enter. Here's what I want everybody to do. When it asks you for a passphrase, do not type a passphrase. Do not type a passphrase. I would like for everybody to hear this. Do not type a passphrase because this is going to add extra complexity to you and your classes or a few other things that you don't need. So hit enter, and then it's going to say enter the same passphrase again. Effectively what you're entering is the empty string there, and then hit enter again. Now once you see this, it's going to have all of this kind of this is not a cryptography course, but this is basically something that would give you some insight on how the key was generated. These symbols do mean something. It should not mean anything to you right now. So just forget about that. Now, if you go in here and go to cd.ssh, and then you do ls, you will see now that I have, for each one of these things, you see how I already had, this is already there. That's the reason I couldn't use it. And then you have this. So typically you guys would have one of two things. You will either have something that says RSA and then another file that says RSA something .pub, right? Whatever it is that this was right here, or whatever suggestion, you remember this? Whatever this was, this right here, you should be able to find this part down in here. You should see that, and you should also see another one that says .pub. This means that's the private key. This is the public key. Now these PEMs are something different. Now, if you noticed, I already had one of those, so just for the purpose of this video, I had to create a pretend one. So my pretend one is this, and then the public key of the pretend key pair that I made was this one. Okay? Never open this one. Don't show a soul this one. Don't do anything with that one. Only do this one. Okay? So if you go back to the instructions, it'll basically walk you through this. You'll do that. It'll say generating this, enter a file. Remember what I said? You guys that don't already have one, don't worry about it. Just take enter. So whatever you see right there, you just hit enter at this point. Right? Just hit enter. Don't change that like I did. Just hit enter. Now when you go to the passphrase, just hit enter. Don't type a passphrase. Just hit enter. Then when it asks you to type the passphrase again, just hit enter. Don't hit the space button. Don't do anything but hit enter for the passphrase. And then when it asks you the passphrase again, just hit enter. Now that is not a workaround. That's not absolutely just saying, hey, this is kind of some workaround. It's basically that you don't need a passphrase is what I'm saying. All right. At that point, then when you get done, you're going to go and you're going to copy this part. Now, in this particular situation, this is not what you copy. You're actually going to copy this. All right? You're going to copy this, not the $sign. Don't copy the $sign, because if you notice over here on my thing, I've already got that well, technically this $sign that has a meaning. We're going to leave that alone for the moment. Sorry, I lost my place here. There we go. Just copy this part up to the $sign, copy it, and then what we're going to do is we're going to go over here and we're going to paste that. Hit enter. And you see how it spit this out? That's what this is actually trying to show you. Like, this is kind of a demonstration. Let me see, where's it at? This is actually what you should see spit out. After you do this, after you copy this part and you paste it in your terminal, you will see something like this. The number itself does not matter. That's just an ID for the process that's there. You don't have to know that whatsoever. let yourself know that this may be something that you need to do, but you shouldn't have to. Notice that there's something else that you've got going on here that you may or may not need to do, that may or may not be necessary. Does not matter. So just be careful of that. All it's saying is that if you have issues, you could do it here. If you are having issues, you could always go to ChatGPT and say, hey, I need you to help me out. Technically, this is not really important at the moment. We don't have to worry about it. Now, this is where you could add it to the Apple keychain, whatever else. If I could give you some advice, I don't know that you'll have to do this. I don't actually know that. What I'm going to assume that you guys are engineers and that you guys are going to be able to work through that. I'm just kind of give you the highlights of what you need to do. All of these instructions are basically telling you, if I were you, I would just go here. I would copy and paste this and then hit enter inside my terminal. At that point, I would just simply jump all the way down here and not do any of this, okay? What you want to do now is click this. Don't do any of this down here, because this is where like you actually create a token that you can plug into your computer. You don't want to do that, because that's going to be a nightmare for you if you're trying to keep up in class and you're new to Git. This is for something else. Some organizations require these. Don't worry about it. Adding a new SSH key to your GitHub account. Basically, I'm just going to show you how to do that. So at this point, you have this right here. You absolutely have this available. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you you should be in this directory now, right? Remember how I told you to go cd into the .ssh? What I want you to do now is I want you to type in cat, and I want you to type in whatever it is there that you see as a pub. So typically a lot of you guys will be seeing this. Some of you guys may see something that says RSA. It doesn't matter. Type it in. Whatever it is, whenever you do this id_ed25519.pub or RSA whatever.pub, mine has to be pretend because I've already got these SSH keys. You'll just do cat pretend, which means concatenate, or basically just display what's in that file, .pub, and then hit enter. Basically all that's doing is just printing out to the screen what is inside this file. Now what you're going to do is you're actually going to just copy this, take your mouse, highlight all of it from the end to the start between here and here, and then just copy that. Okay, copy that. Now what you're going to do is you're going to go over here to your GitHub page. You're going to click this, and you're going to click settings, and you're going to click SSH and GPG keys. You're going to click new SSH, and you're going to put something that identifies your computer. So you can have spaces, whatever you want. So I'm on my desktop Mac computer. Whatever identifies your computer, so that way when you see it, you'll know exactly what computer you're talking about. Don't touch this. Come down here. It looks like something's already there, but this is just a placeholder. There's not actual text there. And then paste that. Remember what we copied? We're going to paste that. So then when we do the add SSH key, it's now inside here. You guys will see it on the list. Mine's kind of down here. See that pretend desktop Mac computer? It was down there. Don't worry about this update billing. This probably see it, but you'll see a little banner here that says you've successfully added the key desktop Mac computer, and there you go. Now what you should be able to do is go back to VS Code. And if you guys remember, let's go back here to our repositories. Give me a second. I need to pause the video so I'm not displaying all my repositories on here. Give me a second. Sorry about that. I just don't want everything displaying on my repositories because some of them, the titles of them are kind of proprietary too. So sorry about that. So this is the repository that I created earlier. So what you would do is you would go to your repositories, you'd click this, you would click your repositories, and then you would go back to the repository that I created if you did it along with me. So you got fake demo, which essentially means nothing. It's going to be junk. We're going to delete it after we get done. We clicked this, if you remember initially, and I clicked that, and then I went over here and I did git clone, and it essentially took all of this repository and it put it on my computer. So now the problem is before I created my SSH key, which is all that we just did, I was only able to bring that repository in because it's a public repository. If it was private, I wouldn't be able to bring it in. But since it's public, that means we're okay with people bringing it in, but we won't let them write to it. So now that I've added my SSH key, I can now write to my repository, and I'll show you how that looks. So remember how this is kind of the file that this is right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to say, by the way, let's take a quick look. Notice that this file is kind of a markdown. It just says fake demo. This file, this was created to demonstrate Git technology. Um, Notice that that's basically what that says. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up here and I'm going to say, yes, I really hope this works. I mean, after all, I'm making a recorded video. It's going to be terrible if I have to redo it. I really hope this works. Okay? Now I'm going to save this. When I save this, I want you to look at this icon. Notice how it says source control? I'm going to save this. And then notice that it has one. What that means is that one file has been changed. What Git Technology does is it actually creates files into your directory that lets VS Code, IntelliJ, or a lot of other systems know that this is an actual repository, and that works out well. So I'm going to click this button. Now, do you see how it says changes to the README? What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to stage that change. Then I'm going to enter a message that says this was a change for demo purpose. Okay. Then I'm going to click commit. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to click this thing that says sync changes. I'm going to do that. And then basically what's going to happen, I'm going to go back here to this repository. I'm going to refresh that page. Did everybody see that? It actually updated the README file. So if you go back and look at this README file, if you look at it kind of raw, code form, this is what it looks like. So that's the actual file. So I'm going to go back here to the code. Check this out. I may actually go over here and create a new file. So I'm going back to my file browser. I will click this. I'm going to say a new file. Maybe I'll say fake text. Sorry, we don't want to do that. I meant to do txt. There we go. And I'm going to say, this is a fake file that I am going to push to my fake demo repo, right? What happens, I'm going to hit save. Notice that this icon says 1. That means one file has been changed. You can do as many as you want to. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stage this change. I'm then going to say my first file to be pushed. Okay. I'm going to click commit, and then I'm going to sync changes. All that seems to work just fine. Now watch what happens when I go over here and I'm like refresh. Notice that that file is now in my repository. See that fake text thing? Notice how this is essentially what I did. Now remember, this is on a website somewhere. This is on a remote repository. This is on my actual local machine, right? Okay. Let's suppose that, by the way, you can actually do this. I recommend that you never do this. Be very careful because you can actually create a situation where you have divergent branches, but let me just show you this. Let's suppose that someone else working on my team adds a file. What I'm going to do is I'm going to simulate adding this file. So I'm going to create a new file and act like somebody else created it because this is on my remote one. I'm going to say, what's my name of my file? Fake file 1 or 2.txt. And we're going to pretend that fake person Sam at my fake workplace put this in the repo. Okay, now what's going to happen is I'm going to commit this. Don't worry about it. We'll just say commit this directly. Basically okay. Now, what we're going to pretend like is Sam from his local computer. Forget what all I just did. Let's suppose that Sam just created a fake file _2.txt, right? He did this and he pushed it. Notice that on my computer, I do not have that file. Does that make sense? I do not have that file. So what I need to do is I will basically go to a terminal. I'm going to put new terminal here. And whenever you do new terminal, it basically opens up in the directory. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do git pull. Now what I want you guys to watch is what happens over here when I do git pull. Notice that I have brought in the file that Sam has created. So now, do you guys remember whenever I was going through and I was doing stage, I was clicking buttons over here? You can actually do this from the command line. I actually encourage you to do it from the command line just so you become familiar with command lines. Let's suppose that I need to make a change. I want to change Sam's, I want to change his file because I want this information in the file. Does that make sense? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to save it. And if you guys remember, I used to go over here and click. What do? I do the plus sign, then I type a message, and I do sync. I'm going to show you exactly what that does from the command line. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do git status. Git status basically says that I'm on this branch. We'll go over this a little bit later, more what that means. But notice that this is telling me that fake file _2 was modified by me. It's in red, which means that I have not committed it yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stage that. I'm going to do git add, and I'm going to do dot, which means stage all changes that I've made to all files. Hit enter. Now instead of that dot, you could actually type in fake file _2 just to stage 1. Typically you'll do the dot probably. Now watch what happens when I do git status. Git status is now green, which means that it's been staged to be pushed. I'm now going to do what's called a commit. I've staged it. Remember how I went over here and I clicked the, so if you look, notice how it's been staged as though I clicked that plus button. I'll leave it over here just so you guys see what happens. I'm now going to commit it. I'm going to do git commit -m. That -m means add a message. So what I'm going to do is I changed Sam's file because I wanted to, right? Hateful message. Now, I put it in double quotes. I'm going to hit enter. Now what that does is that means that this change has been committed, but the commit is only on my local version of the repository. Basically what you want to think of is locally you have the repository and then you have the remote one. Sometimes they're not in sync with each other until you do something called git push. Now when I do git push, that's essentially pushing it up. That means, look here, there's no longer anything else to stage. It's always been done. So effectively all those buttons I was pushing, it was the same thing as doing git add period, git commit with a message, and then git push, and it pushed it up. So now when I go over here to the repository, here's what I want you guys to look at. I'm going to click code to refresh the screen. Look at what this was. Fake file 2. Do you guys remember this? These messages? Look at this message. This is the message that I put. What this does is anytime there's been a change to a file, somebody can look at the commit message and see what was changed and why it was changed. These are the messages that you put on there to let people know. So you have git file _2. Notice that this is the change that I made, and now it's on the remote file, or it's on the remote repository, and it's on my local repository. Now here's what you could do. You could always do git pull, because right now both of them are the same. If you do git pull and you see this message already up to date, that means that you are in sync with the remote repository. That's basically what that means. All right. Now, if you do git status and there's essentially nothing there, it says nothing to commit, working tree is clean, that means that you have not done anything that needs to be staged. That means you're still in sync. You haven't changed any files, anything else. So whether you want to use the terminal, by the way, this terminal that I'm using, this is not something that you all want to use as far as this goes. You always want to do these things in Git Bash. I think you folks in VS Code can use the terminal just fine, I think. That should work. But basically, anything I do in terminal, that's what you should do on the Git Bash if you're on Windows. I think VS Code will make it work out okay if you use the terminal like I did here, because this is actually the terminal inside of VS Code, which makes it very easy. If you don't like that, just keep in mind that we could always do, something weird here, and then I'm going to save that. Notice that you could always just use this. You could always click this. You could stage it, add a message, random message, commit, sync the changes. And you don't even have to go over here and look, but if you're just curious about what happens, you can click this. Notice that the message, this was changed a few minutes ago, it says random message. And then you can see that when you look at the file, it's actually got that random message that I clicked on there. So maybe we don't want that anymore. We're going to take that off, right? So we decided that this is not okay. We're going to click save. Again, if you want to do it from the terminal, this is the same thing. I would, if I'm in the terminal, I click this plus button, or I can go down here and do git add. Notice that that stages it. I could do git commit -m. Decided I did not like the latest change for whatever reason. Close the quotation, hit enter. Notice that that was the same thing as me typing the message there. And then what I could do is I could do git push, and that's essentially pushing it up. And if you guys look, you'll see that that is no longer part of it. I deleted it. So that's effectively Git technology using GitHub as the remote repository. So if you're able to follow along and you're able to make changes on your VS Code and you can stage them, commit them, and push them, and you're able to see your changes on your fake repository, then you should be good. Now the question is, what do you do with this fake repository? Well, here's what you do. You actually go to settings, go all the way down here, and it says how do you get rid of this? You click delete repository. You basically copy this because you're going to have to retype it all. GitHub's going to warn you a bunch about this because this can have dire consequences if you do this unexpectedly. Yeah, I've read this and understand this. Bad things will happen. Now it says to make sure that you don't actually do this, you have to type all this out, which I'm just going to paste it in there and then delete this repository. And then it's gone for good, right? All of that's completely gone. And if I want to remove it, I can just basically go to the terminal, git bash, whatever, and I could just delete it. If you guys want to see how you do that, you can go to the terminal. We could go to here. Remember, that takes you home. I think I created a course called Change Directory CSC 220. Is that correct? Notice that my fake directory, you could, from git bash or your terminal, you could do, that means remove, but you can only do that with files. So -rf means remove directory. Fake demo. Notice that your computer will never ask, are you sure? It's just gone. Okay, so that pretty much sums up how to use Git technology, how to put it on your machine, how to get Git bash going. For those of you guys on Windows, how to use terminal with Git, how to use your Mac terminal with Git, and how to associate your computer with your remote GitHub repository, how to generate an SSH key, associate your computer with the GitHub remote repository. So hopefully this was informative and that this is able to help you. What I would like for all of you to do is to actually do this, follow this video, make sure that you can create a repository, make sure that you can generate an SSH key on your local computer, make sure that you can take that SSH key, the public version of it, and you copy and paste that into your SSH keys on GitHub. And at that point, you should be able to push changes from you should be able to bring in a GitHub repository to your local computer using git clone and pasting that address that you get from your repository link. You should be able to open that directory into VS Code. VS Code will automatically recognize using the hidden files that you can't see. It'll know that that is a GitHub repository. You should be able to make changes, save them. You should be able to after you save them, it'll show that you need to stage, then commit with a message, and then push. Then you should be able to go back to your remote repository and see the changes, if that makes sense. Okay, so with all that said, hopefully this was informative and not too much to swallow at one time. Hopefully you didn't take off a giant chunk of food here and get choked on it. I believe this is a very powerful thing. If you are going to be a serious software engineer, a serious software developer, and in general a professional in a lot of fields that develop anything, whether it even be software or you're using things to develop models, whatever, you're probably going to be using Git technology, and there's an excellent chance that GitHub will be that or GitLabs. I think GitHub's by far more popular, but GitLab is also popular. No, make sure, but for this purpose, just get GitHub going, and then you can learn the other ones a little bit later on. This is extremely important for you to learn as a budding kind of professional in the field. There's a good chance some of you already know it, but do not walk into a job interview for an engineering job or development job or any kind of professional career that develops anything not knowing how to use GitHub, because that could actually get someone to say, you know what, this person is not mature enough. That's very possible. So with that said, there's some career advice. This is how we use Git and GitHub together. Again, I hope that it was very helpful, and I will see you guys at the next lecture. Thank you for watching.